falls to the earth and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. My natural inclination when I think about seeds in our lives is to understand our faith as a seed that's planted within us. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Often that little mustard seed of faith is the only thing that keeps us believing. It is sometimes the only thing that gets us to the next day. But here, Jesus isn't talking about the seed or the grain or the kernel of wheat as flourishing. Here, Jesus is talking about it dying. This seemingly innocent story is easy if it's left as metaphor. However, once we ask the question, which it begs, what exactly does the grain of wheat mean for us? The story no longer remains innocuous. The story very quickly becomes a painful and confusing one. We begin to discover that this whole story turns on one question. Why death? Often people say that the cross is the answer. Have you heard people say this? I believe that it is more true to say that the cross is actually the question of our lives. Why death? Why cling to a cross on Sunday morning when all we do is run from it every single other day of the week? Why a cross? But in order to get to that point, to understand the ramifications of these questions, then we need to slow down the imagery. We need to get down and dirty in it. So I'm going to need you to set back a little bit in your pew. Get comfortable. So that we can understand the picture that Jesus paints for us. He often gifts us with these words so that they can take root in us and grow slowly. I should tell you something first. Once you get on board with being a seed, it's going to require some work. See, real seeds go about the process of dying very, very naturally. We, however, do not. So, when the seed dies, what's the first thing that happens? It has to fall, right? From the safety of wherever it happened to be, in a pocket, in a packet, in the hand of the farmer, on a chaff of wheat, the seed must tumble down from that which it has known into the great unknown. And this, for me, is okay for the seed. This, however, does not sound okay for me, or for you, or for Jesus. Nobody wants to be dropped. We don't belong on the floor where we can be trampled upon or buried or die. I happen to not even like the words coming out of Jesus' mouth. But by the time the seed does settle into the ground, it's probably pretty darn thankful to have just survived the fall. And yet Jesus makes it clear that falling is just the first step. I'd like to stop at falling. I'd gladly suck in the dust of the pavement below me if I could just rest my head on the ground for a bit. Have you ever felt that way? But but we don't get to stay there. And I can't help but remember that when Jesus fell to the ground, collapsing under the weight of his very own cross, even he isn't allowed to catch his breath. So as we lie on the ground, how could we not ask, why? Why the cross? Why death? And still it doesn't stop there. Next, the seed is buried. It is enshrouded in layer upon layer of warm, dark earth. And we sit in the hidden underground chambers, closed off from everything, and in some ways even closed off from ourselves. And think, how can we ever get out of this mess? If I'm the seed, at this point I may be asking, no longer asking, why the cross? And why death? At this point, we may be begging for the end. Not the end of our lives, but the end of all that seems to be making up our lives. As life piles up, we are drawn deeper down into the earth, and we can see no way out down here under the weight of the world. However, the seed does something extraordinary, and we would miss it if we hadn't slowed down Jesus' imagery. The seed gives in. The seed doesn't give up. The seed gives itself to that which has buried it. And it is only then that the seed starts to realize that it isn't actually died. The seed learns something. That dying is actually resurrection in reverse. The seed knows the path out because the seed has lived the path in. Dying is resurrection in reverse. Sometimes in the Bible, this portion of Scripture is called, Jesus speaks about his death. This is wrong. Jesus is actually speaking about life. His life and our life. Our lives are spent dying, but not for the purpose of death, for the purpose of resurrection. I know it's a hard sell. I know losing our lives to gain it makes very, very little sense. Jesus' disciples weren't so fond of it either. But if you're still thinking about being a seed, if you're still with me on the seed journey, let's follow the seed out. So just as a seed is let go in the dying process, letting go is the first step in resurrection. The seed lets go of the shell that's been cracked open in the dying process. And letting go seems like a small thing, although I believe it may be the hardest part of dying and of living. Because we have to loosen our grasp, which makes no sense and feels very, very scary. The only reason I can trust to let something go is because of this one thing that I often wonder. I wonder if God was scared to let Jesus go. If he also felt that letting go means allowing something very precious to feel as though it has slipped away. I guess he already knew the outcome. But I do know that I can only let go because God did. I can only let go because Jesus showed us the path out. I could never forge the path on my own. The second step, as we follow the seed out, is what's actually happening while the seed is buried. The seed is actually nourished. The seed begins to realize that the weight of the earth is not meant to suffocate it, but rather feed it. The seed receives strength of perseverance from all that surrounds it for the resurrection. It is as if all those painful pieces which buried us can teach us something, can give us something for what is to come. Our story today in John stops at verse 33, which is fine because what follows after that for a few verses is just another metaphor to highlight losing one's life. But after the metaphor in verse 36, which we don't have, it says, "And then Jesus hid from them." Maybe he went down into the soil where nobody can see him, because so much of the rising process goes on below the surface. Sometimes when we are the one growing, being resurrected, pushing up through the earth, we can hardly notice the growth because of how hard it is to move all that earth. There is hardly enough light to see that Jesus is buried down there in the earth with us. It isn't until we are able to take that first gasp of oxygen as we poke up that we begin to realize that life actually is springing forth. It's been a long, long journey down, falling and lying in the ground, buried and dying, only then to be called forth to let go and be nourished and receive strength to push up through the earth, just so we can live. So still, my question is why death? Why the cross? Why not just life? Because now, having been down in the ground, we live in a new way. We live resurrected, which is different than living the life that we knew. Resurrection is knowing life even when faced with death. There is one last thing, though, if you're a seed. The last thing, and it only happens in the resurrection. It only happens when the seed goes through this long process. See, resurrection, it doesn't happen in isolation. Life could, at least as we can tolerate, life could stay as seeds forever. But if the seed is willing to die, then it can bear fruit. And why is this so very, very necessary to life? It's because of the seed sitting next to you. Because maybe the seed sitting next to you is dying. And the only way that it can live is to receive nourishment. See, fruit gives nourishment to that which is starving for something. Your fruit may be something that you have already been resurrected from. Your fruit is the seed's ability to live beyond itself. We can only get to the fruit piece, having known death and life from death. And we can only cling to this hope because of the life of Christ. If that was not true, then everything within me would cause me to flee from death. Hold on tightly instead of letting go. Pick myself up instead of seeing what's there in the ground. Dig myself out instead of learning from the earth. There is only one reason that we can trust the seed's path. Because Jesus is the very seed of God. heart of all that is good and lovely, true and pure, gets dirty in this life with us, falls and is buried and dies to show us the path to resurrection. The only reason I'd be willing to die is if I knew someone that had done more than just live through it. Jesus does more than just live through it. Jesus brings life to life. And shows us that when our very last hopes have been buried underground, true, green, whole, new life will rise again.